The Lost Army of the Persian King Cambyses, the greatest military mystery of the ancient world. 50,000 soldiers, an entire army, commanded by one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. And in a single moment of history, they vanished. No survivors, no clear records, no battlefield, no tombs, just silence. For more than 2,500 years, historians, archaeologists, and explorers have asked the same question. What really happened to the lost army of the Persian king Cambyses? Did a violent sandstorm bury them alive beneath the desert? Did they perish of thirst while marching through one of the harshest environments on Earth? Or were they secretly ambushed and destroyed by enemies hiding deep within the Egyptian wilderness? The story begins in 525 BCE, during the age of mighty empires, an age when kings commanded armies of tens of thousands, when ancient civilizations battled for control of the known world, and when one Persian king would launch a campaign that would lead to one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. This is the story of Cambyses II, the Persian conqueror of Egypt, and the army that walked into the desert and never returned. The rise of the Persian Empire. To understand the mystery of the lost army, we must first understand the empire that sent it. In the 6th century BCE, the world witnessed the rise of a new superpower, the Persian Empire. Founded by the legendary ruler Cyrus the Great, Persia quickly expanded across vast territories. Cyrus was unlike many conquerors before him. Instead of destroying the cultures he conquered, he often allowed them to keep their traditions and religions. This policy helped the Persian Empire grow rapidly. By the time of Cyrus's death, Persia controlled lands stretching from Central Asia to the borders of the Mediterranean. But the empire was far from finished expanding. After Cyrus came his son, a king whose ambition would take Persian armies even further. His name was Cambyses II. The conquest of Egypt. In the ancient world, few civilizations held as much prestige as Egypt. For thousands of years, the land of the Nile had been home to powerful pharaohs, monumental pyramids, and one of the most advanced societies on Earth. But by the time Cambyses rose to power, Egypt was no longer at its peak. Internal struggles had weakened the kingdom. This made it an attractive target for the expanding Persian Empire. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his invasion. His army marched toward Egypt with enormous force. Ancient records suggest his forces included soldiers from many regions of the empire: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and Greek mercenaries. The two armies finally met at the Battle of Pelusium, near the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. According to ancient historians, the Persians used a strange tactic during the battle. Egyptians held cats as sacred animals. Legend says the Persian soldiers carried cats or painted them on their shields, knowing Egyptian warriors would hesitate to harm them. Whether this story is myth or reality remains debated, but the result of the battle is not. The Persian army crushed the Egyptian forces. Soon after, Cambyses entered the capital city of Memphis. Egypt had fallen. For the first time in its long history, the land of the pharaohs was ruled by a foreign empire. But Cambyses' ambitions did not end there.
He had other enemies to confront, and one of them lived far out in the desert. The Oracle of Siwa. Deep within the western desert of Egypt, far from the Nile Valley, lies an oasis known as Siwa. Even in ancient times, this remote oasis was famous. It was home to one of the most mysterious religious centers of the ancient world, the Oracle of Amun. Pilgrims traveled vast distances to seek the wisdom of the oracle. Kings, generals, and travelers believed the priests there could speak with the gods. The oracle had enormous influence, and that influence worried Cambyses. Some ancient sources claim the oracle openly criticized the king. Others suggest Cambyses feared the priests could inspire rebellion among the Egyptians. Whatever the reason, the Persian ruler decided the oracle had to be destroyed. But reaching Siwa was no easy task. The oasis lay hundreds of kilometers deep in the desert. The route required crossing one of the most unforgiving landscapes on the planet. Still, Cambyses believed his army could succeed, and so he ordered an expedition. The army marches into the desert. Cambyses assembled a force of 50,000 soldiers. Their mission was simple: march west from the Egyptian city of Thebes, cross the desert, reach the Siwa Oasis, and destroy the oracle. Ancient historian Herodotus, writing about a century later, recorded the story. According to him, the army began its journey with confidence. They traveled first to the Karga Oasis, a known stop along desert trade routes. From there, they continued deeper into the Sahara. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. No rivers, no shade, only sand and scorching sun. At first, the march went as planned, but somewhere beyond Karga, something went terribly wrong. According to Herodotus, when the army reached the open desert, a massive sandstorm appeared. A storm so powerful it swallowed the entire army. 50,000 men, buried beneath mountains of sand, forever lost to history. Or so the story goes. But is that what truly happened? Or is the truth far more complicated?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The sandstorm that swallowed an army. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the fate of Cambyses' army was sealed by the desert itself. After leaving the oasis of Karga, the soldiers marched westward into the open Sahara. For several days, the journey continued without major problems. The army followed experienced guides who knew the hidden routes between oases. But the deeper they traveled into the desert, the more dangerous the landscape became. The Sahara is not just a sea of sand. It is a living environment of shifting dunes, scorching heat, and violent winds capable of reshaping the land overnight. Herodotus wrote that the army had reached about halfway to Siwa when disaster struck. Without warning, the sky darkened. A powerful desert wind began to rise. At first, it may have seemed like an ordinary sandstorm, but within minutes, the storm grew into something far more terrifying. Walls of sand rose into the air. The wind howled like a living creature. Visibility vanished. Soldiers could no longer see the men standing beside them. The storm raged with such intensity that it buried everything in its path: weapons, supplies, animals, and thousands of soldiers. When the storm finally passed, the army was gone, completely swallowed by the desert. Not a single man returned to tell the story. For centuries, this explanation became the accepted version of events. But modern historians have asked an important question. Could a single sandstorm really destroy an entire army? The reality of the Sahara Desert. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. It covers nearly 9 million square kilometers, stretching across North Africa like a vast ocean of sand and stone.
Temperatures during the day can reach 50 degrees Celsius. At night, the desert can become freezing cold. Water sources are rare, and navigation without knowledge of the terrain can quickly become deadly. Ancient armies were not designed for such environments. Most military campaigns in the ancient world took place near rivers, fertile lands, or trade routes. But the journey to Siwa required crossing hundreds of kilometers of hostile terrain. Even today, experienced explorers treat the Sahara with caution. Without modern navigation equipment, survival becomes extremely difficult. Ancient soldiers would have depended entirely on guides and supply lines. If those guides were lost, or if the army ran out of water, the consequences could be catastrophic. But historians still question whether a single sandstorm could bury 50,000 soldiers without leaving any trace. And that leads to another possibility. Perhaps the army did not simply disappear. Perhaps it was destroyed. Enemies in the desert. The Western Desert was not empty. Nomadic tribes had lived there for centuries. These desert peoples understood the land better than any invading army ever could. They knew where the hidden water sources were. They knew the safest paths between oases. And they knew how to survive where others would perish. One of these groups may have seen Cambyses' army as a threat. An invading force marching towards the sacred Oracle of Siwa could not be ignored. If local tribes decided to resist the Persians, they would have a powerful advantage: knowledge of the terrain. Desert warfare does not rely on massive armies or large battles. It favors ambushes, small attacks, disrupting supply lines. If the Persian army lost its guides or water supplies, it would quickly fall into chaos. Soldiers weakened by thirst and heat would become easy targets. Some historians believe that the army may have been gradually destroyed during the journey, not by nature alone, but by enemies hidden within the desert. The mystery of the missing evidence. If an entire army disappeared in the Sahara, we might expect to find some evidence: weapons, armor, human remains, ancient campsites. Yet for centuries, explorers searching for Cambyses' army found nothing. The desert seemed to have erased every trace. This lack of evidence created even more mystery. Was the story exaggerated? Did the army actually exist? Or had its remains simply been buried too deeply beneath the shifting sands? The Sahara is constantly changing. Dunes can move several meters each year. A site buried thousands of years ago might now lie beneath enormous layers of sand. But sometimes the desert reveals its secrets. And in recent decades, archaeologists have begun to uncover clues that may bring us closer to the truth. The first modern searches. In the 19th century, European explorers became fascinated with the legend of Cambyses' lost army. Archaeologists and adventurers traveled deep into the Egyptian desert searching for evidence. But the Sahara is vast, and finding a single lost army within millions of square kilometers is almost impossible. Early expeditions returned empty-handed. Still, the mystery captured the imagination of historians around the world. Could one of the greatest military disasters in the history really remain hidden forever?
The discovery of the oasis routes. By the early 20th century, explorers began studying the ancient desert routes more carefully. They mapped the paths connecting oases like Karga, Dakhla, and Siwa. These routes had been used for thousands of years by traders and travelers. If Cambyses' army followed these same paths, it would have left at least temporary camps along the way. Some researchers suggested the army may have attempted a more direct route through unexplored desert. If that were true, they may have entered one of the most dangerous regions of the Sahara, a place where sandstorms are common, and where survival without water becomes nearly impossible. A clue in the desert. In 2009,
a remarkable discovery made headlines around the world. Two Italian archaeologists claimed they had found evidence of Cambyses' lost army. While exploring remote desert regions west of the Nile, they reported discovering objects that could belong to the missing soldiers. Bronze weapons, arrowheads, human bones, even fragments of ancient armor. If confirmed, the discovery could solve the mystery that had lasted more than 2 millennia. But not all scholars were convinced. Many archaeologists argued the evidence was too limited, and some believed the artifacts might belong to a different group entirely. The debate continues today. The role of ancient propaganda. Another possibility is that the story itself was exaggerated. Ancient historians often relied on second-hand information. Herodotus, who recorded the story, wrote his accounts about a century after the events. It is possible that the story evolved over time. Persian records from the period are limited. Egyptian sources may have had reasons to portray the Persian king as cursed or defeated. If Cambyses suffered a failed expedition, the story might have grown into a dramatic legend. An entire army swallowed by the desert would certainly capture the imagination. But historians must always ask whether ancient sources are completely reliable. Cambyses, the king. The mystery of the lost army is also tied to the personality of Cambyses himself. Ancient Greek writers often portrayed him as unstable and cruel. Some stories claim he mocked Egyptian gods. Others say he ordered temples destroyed. However, many modern historians believe these accounts may be biased. Greek writers often viewed Persian rulers as tyrants. In reality, Cambyses may have been a more complex figure. He ruled a vast empire. He conquered one of the oldest civilizations in the world. And he attempted to expand Persian influence deep into the African desert. The expedition to Siwa may have been part of a larger strategy to control the region. But the mission would soon become a legend. Cambyses the King. A desert that erases history. The Sahara has an extraordinary ability to hide the past. Entire cities have vanished beneath its sands. Ancient trade routes have disappeared. Civilizations that once thrived there are now known only through scattered ruins. If Cambyses' army truly perished in the desert, archaeologists might someday uncover weapons scattered across ancient dunes. Mass graves of soldiers, fragments of armor, remains of supply caravans, or even campsites marking the army's final march. Each of these discoveries would help reconstruct what happened more than 2,500 years ago, and finally answer one of history's greatest mysteries: the army that walked into the sands. For now, the fate of Cambyses' army remains uncertain. An entire force of soldiers marched into the Sahara with a clear mission: destroy the Oracle of Siwa. Instead, they became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. The desert kept their secret for centuries, and perhaps it still does.
The route across the western desert. To understand what may have happened to Cambyses' army, historians have tried to reconstruct the route they likely followed. Ancient accounts suggest the expedition began in Thebes, one of the most important cities of Upper Egypt. From there, the army would have moved west toward the chain of desert oases that formed natural stopping points for travelers. The first major destination was likely the Karga Oasis, located about 200 kilometers west of the Nile. Karga had been an important settlement for thousands of years. It offered water, palm groves, and shelter from the harsh desert winds.
From Karga, the journey would continue deeper into the desert. The next stage of the route becomes more uncertain. To reach the Siwa Oasis, the army would need to travel hundreds of kilometers through difficult terrain. Possible routes included passing near the Dakhla Oasis or attempting a more direct crossing of the desert. Each option carried enormous risk. Water sources were rare, and the desert landscape was unpredictable. A single mistake in navigation could lead an army into endless dunes with no way back. The logistics of an ancient army. Moving an army of 50,000 soldiers through the desert was an enormous logistical challenge. Each soldier needed water, food, and equipment. In addition, the army would likely have been accompanied by pack animals, supply wagons, servants and laborers, military officers. If we estimate that each soldier needed at least 3 to 4 liters of water per day, the total water requirements would have been staggering. This means the expedition required a massive supply system. Caravans of camels or donkeys would have been needed to carry water skins across the desert, but animals themselves require water, which means the expedition had to move carefully from oasis to oasis. If the army lost its supply line, or if its water reserves ran out, the consequences would be immediate and deadly. The legend of the desert storm. The story of the sandstorm remains the most famous explanation for the army's disappearance. Massive sandstorms, known as Cambyses winds, can sweep across the desert with incredible force. These storms carry enormous clouds of sand and dust. Visibility can drop to almost zero. Travel becomes impossible. But modern scientists have debated whether such a storm could completely bury an entire army. Some believe it is possible. Over centuries, moving dunes could slowly cover any remains left behind. Others argued that even the strongest sandstorm would leave some evidence. Weapons, bones, or equipment should eventually reappear as dunes shift. Yet the desert has remained silent.
The desert as a weapon. Throughout history, armies have often underestimated the power of the environment. In many ways, the desert itself can become a weapon. Unlike forests or mountains, deserts offer almost no protection. No trees for shade, no rivers for water, no landmarks to guide travelers. Instead, there is only endless horizon. For soldiers unfamiliar with such landscapes, the psychological pressure alone can be devastating. Marching for days without seeing anything but sand can break morale. Men begin to doubt their direction. Supplies begin to disappear faster than expected. Fatigue grows. And in the Sahara, even small mistakes can quickly become fatal. If Cambyses' army lost its route even briefly, the desert would begin claiming lives almost immediately. The collapse of discipline. An army of 50,000 men requires strict discipline to function. Orders must be followed. Formations must be maintained. Supplies must be carefully managed. But in extreme environments, discipline can collapse. As thirst increases and temperatures climb, soldiers begin to panic. Water becomes more valuable than gold. Arguments break out. Men may begin abandoning their units in search of survival. Some might attempt to return east toward the Nile. Others might wander deeper into the desert, hoping to find water. Once order breaks down, an organized army can quickly turn into scattered groups struggling simply to stay alive. The fate of the guides. The desert guides were perhaps the most critical members of the expedition. Without them, the Persian soldiers would have had almost no chance of navigating the Sahara. But guides could also become targets. If soldiers began blaming them for wrong turns or lost routes, tensions might have risen quickly. Some historians believe the guides may have been killed during the journey.
If that happened, the army would suddenly find itself completely lost in the desert. Without knowledge of where the next oasis lay, survival would become nearly impossible. The possibility of fragmentation. Rather than disappearing all at once, the army may have slowly fragmented. Groups of soldiers could have separated from the main force. Some may have attempted to return toward Karga Oasis. Others might have continued west toward Siwa. In the vastness of the Sahara, small groups could vanish easily. Over time, these groups might have died in different locations across hundreds of kilometers. This would explain why archaeologists have struggled to find a single massive burial site. The army may not lie in one place. Instead, its remains could be scattered across the desert. The political consequences. The disappearance of such a large military force would have been a serious event for the Persian Empire. Cambyses had already conquered Egypt, but losing 50,000 soldiers would weaken his position. Ancient sources suggest that Cambyses faced growing instability during the later years of his reign. Rebellions erupted in several parts of the empire. If the expedition truly ended in disaster, it may have contributed to these problems. The empire suddenly found itself without a large portion of its military strength, and enemies would certainly notice. The mysterious death of Cambyses. Not long after the failed expedition, Cambyses himself died under mysterious circumstances. Ancient historians give conflicting accounts. Some say he died from an accidental wound while mounting his horse. Others claim he took his own life. There are even suggestions of assassination. His death ended his rule suddenly, and with it, many details of the expedition may have been lost. Records that might have explained the army's fate could have disappeared during the political chaos that followed. The rise of Darius. After Cambyses' death, a new ruler emerged. His name was Darius I. Darius would become one of the most powerful kings of the Persian Empire. He reorganized the empire's administration and expanded its territories even further. But interestingly, there are no detailed records from Darius about the lost army. If the disaster had truly been catastrophic, the new king may have chosen to keep the story quiet. Empires often avoid recording their greatest failures. Legends passed through generations. Over time, the story of the lost army spread across the ancient world. Travelers repeated the tale. Historians wrote about it. Local desert tribes developed their own versions of the story. Some legends claimed the soldiers were cursed by the gods. Others believed the desert itself had swallowed them as punishment for attempting to destroy the Oracle of Ammon. Whether these stories were true or not, they helped preserve the mystery for more than 2,000 years. The search continues. Today, archaeologists and explorers still search for evidence of Cambyses' lost army. Every few years, new expeditions venture into remote regions of the Sahara. Satellite imagery continues to reveal hidden structures beneath the sand. Advanced technology allows scientists to study the desert in ways ancient explorers could never imagine. And with each discovery, the possibility grows that the lost army may someday be found. If that moment comes, it would solve one of the greatest historical mysteries of the ancient world. A secret still buried beneath the sands. The Sahara is one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It has hidden cities, lost trade routes, forgotten civilizations, and somewhere beneath its endless dunes, it may still hold the remains of an army that marched into the desert more than 2,500 years ago. 50,000 soldiers, sent by a powerful king, vanishing without a trace. A mystery that continues to challenge historians, archaeologists, and explorers. Because sometimes, history does not disappear. It simply waits to be discovered. The army that never returned. Imagine standing alone in the middle of the Sahara. The wind moves softly across the dunes. Sand stretches endlessly toward the horizon. No roads, no cities, no signs of life, only silence. But beneath those shifting sands, the past may still be waiting. Somewhere out there, thousands of soldiers may lie buried, their weapons lost, their story unfinished. They marched into the desert with a clear mission. They carried the power of one of the greatest empires in history. And yet, against the vastness of the Sahara, even the might of an empire was not enough. The desert kept its secret for centuries. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the dunes, the lost army of Cambyses is still there, waiting for the moment when history will finally reveal the truth.